The dusty road stretched endlessly under the sweltering Montana sun of 1878, where a small boy sat crying, his shoulders shaking with each sob that racked his thin frame. Ethan Vance pulled his wagon to a halt, the weathered wheels creaking in protest as the dust settled around them. He had been riding for 2 days straight, his cattle sold in Helena and his pockets heavier than when he'd left his ranch. But nothing could have prepared him for the sight of this child alone in the vast emptiness of the frontier. "Hey there, little fella," Ethan called out, his voice softer than the leather of his well-worn gloves. His eyes, blue as the Montana sky, surveyed the surrounding plains for any sign of parents or a homestead. Finding none, he climbed down from his seat, boots hitting the dirt with a dull thud. "What are you doing out here all by your lonesome?" The boy looked up, face streaked with tears and dirt, eyes red-rimmed and swollen. He couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old. "They're gone," he whispered, voice cracking. "Everyone's gone." Ethan crouched down, keeping his movements slow and gentle, mindful not to frighten the child further. "Who's gone, son?" "Ma and Pa," the boy replied, hiccuping through tears. "The fever took 'em both last week. I been at the homestead by myself, but there ain't no food left." His small hands clutched a worn, stuffed rabbit, its fabric stained and fraying at the seams. Ethan felt his chest tighten. The frontier was unforgiving, and disease often swept through communities with devastating results. "What's your name, boy?" "Samuel," the child replied, wiping his nose with his sleeve. "Samuel Turner." "Well, Samuel Turner, I'm Ethan Vance." He extended his hand, which the boy hesitantly shook. "I've got a ranch about a day's ride from here. How about you come with me, get some proper food in your belly, and we figure things out from there?" Samuel stared up at him with uncertainty, clutching his rabbit tighter. "I promise I'm not going to hurt you," Ethan said, his voice steady and reassuring. "No child should be out here alone." After a moment's hesitation, Samuel nodded. Ethan lifted him gently into the wagon, settling him on the seat beside him. As they set off, Ethan couldn't help but wonder what he was going to do with an orphan child. At 32, he'd built his life around solitude, the memory of the war still haunting him 10 years after its end. The only company he kept was his cattle, his horse, and occasionally the townspeople when he ventured in for supplies. The boy remained silent as they traveled, occasionally sniffling or wiping away a tear. Ethan offered him water from his canteen and some jerky from his pack, which Samuel devoured with the hunger of one who hadn't eaten properly in days. "How far is your ranch?" Samuel finally asked, his voice small against the vastness around them. "We'll be there by tomorrow afternoon," Ethan replied, adjusting his hat against the setting sun. "It's not much, but it's home." As dusk settled over the plains, Ethan guided the wagon off the road to make camp for the night. He built a fire, cooked a simple meal of beans and the last of his trail bread, and watched as Samuel fell asleep wrapped in Ethan's spare blanket, the stuffed rabbit tucked securely under his arm. Looking at the sleeping child, Ethan felt a strange protectiveness wash over him. He'd have to take the boy to town, find someone to take him in. The thought of bringing him to the orphanage in Helena made his stomach turn. He'd heard stories about those places overcrowded, underfunded, harsh. But what other choice did he have? A bachelor rancher was no fit guardian for a child. The next day's journey was filled with Samuel's questions about ranch life, horses, and cattle. The boy's natural curiosity seemed to emerge with the sunrise, and Ethan found himself smiling more than he had in years as he answered each inquiry patiently. By mid-afternoon, they crested a hill, and Ethan's ranch came into view, a modest cabin with a barn, corral, and fenced pastures where his cattle grazed. It wasn't grand, but he'd built it with his own hands after the war, a place where he could find peace. "Is this all yours?" Samuel asked, eyes wide with wonder. "Every acre," Ethan confirmed, a hint of pride in his voice. "Built that cabin myself 5 years ago." As they approached, a figure emerged from the barn, a woman with auburn hair tied back in a practical braid, wearing a simple dress and apron. Ethan's brow furrowed in confusion. "Who's that?" Samuel asked, pointing. "I'm not sure," Ethan replied honestly, slowing the wagon as they approached. He hadn't been expecting anyone, especially not a woman. When they reached the yard, the woman walked toward them, wiping her hands on her apron. Her face was flushed from work, but her eyes were kind and curious as they took in the sight of Ethan with a child. "Mr. Vance," she greeted, her voice carrying a slight Eastern accent. "I hope you don't mind the intrusion. I'm Dahlia Evans. Your neighbor, Mr. Collins, sent me. Said you might be looking for help around the place." Ethan climbed down from the wagon, helping Samuel down after him. "Miss Evans, I'm afraid there's been some misunderstanding. I never asked Collins for any help." Dahlia's cheeks colored slightly. "He said you wouldn't admit to needing it, but that your place could use a woman's touch." She gestured toward the cabin. "I've been cleaning and putting things in order. I hope that's all right." Before Ethan could respond, Samuel stepped forward. "Are you going to be staying here too?" he asked, hope evident in his voice. Dahlia looked down at the boy, surprise registering on her face before her expression softened. "And who might you be, young man?" "This is Samuel," Ethan interjected. "I found him on the road yesterday, his parents." He glanced at the boy, not wanting to speak of death so bluntly in front of him. "I see," Dahlia said, understanding immediately. She knelt down to Samuel's level. "Well, Samuel, I'm very pleased to meet you, and to answer your question, I don't know yet if I'll be staying." "That depends on Mr. Vance." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, suddenly aware of the state of his appearance after days on the trail. "Miss Evans, I appreciate your efforts, but I'm not in a position to hire help right now." "I understand," she replied, straightening up. "But perhaps we could discuss it over supper. I've already prepared a meal, and it would be a shame to let it go to waste." The smell of cooking wafted from the cabin, reminding Ethan that he hadn't had a proper meal in days. Samuel looked up at him hopefully, and Ethan found himself nodding in agreement. "Thank you, Miss Evans. That's mighty kind of you." Inside, Ethan was astonished at the transformation. His usually sparse and somewhat disorderly cabin was clean, with fresh wildflowers in a jar on the table, and his meager possessions organized neatly. The meal Dahlia had prepared, rabbit stew with vegetables from his neglected garden, was better than anything he'd eaten in months. As they ate, Dahlia explained her situation. She had come west from Boston after the death of her parents, seeking a new start. She had been staying with the Collins family while looking for work, and old man Collins had suggested Ethan might need a housekeeper. "I can cook, clean, garden, and even help with some of the ranch work," she said. "I'm stronger than I look, Mr. Vance." Ethan studied her across the table. She was pretty, with intelligent green eyes and a determined set to her jaw. He guessed her to be in her mid-20s, perhaps 26 or 27. But more importantly, he saw how she interacted with Samuel, gentle yet straightforward, treating him with respect rather than condescension. "I can't offer much in the way of wages," Ethan said slowly, surprising himself with the implication that he was considering her proposal. "Room and board plus a small stipend would be sufficient," Dahlia replied. "And," she hesitated, glancing at Samuel, "the boy needs someone to look after him properly." Ethan followed her gaze to Samuel, who was enjoying his second helping of stew with the enthusiasm only a child could muster. "I plan to take him to town tomorrow, see if there's a family that might take him in." "The orphanage, you mean?" Dahlia said quietly, so Samuel wouldn't hear. "I worked briefly with an orphanage in Boston, Mr. Vance. They're not pleasant places, even the best of them." Ethan frowned, knowing she was right but seeing no alternative. "I'm hardly fit to raise a child, Miss Evans." "Perhaps not alone," she conceded, "but with help. This boy has already lost everything familiar to him. To uproot him again so soon seems cruel." The conversation was interrupted when Samuel asked for more bread, and the subject shifted to lighter topics. After dinner, Dahlia showed Samuel where he could wash up and prepared a makeshift bed for him on a pallet near the fireplace. Once the boy was asleep, Ethan stepped outside onto the porch, needing fresh air and space to think. To his surprise, Dahlia followed him out, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the evening chill. "I apologize if I overstepped earlier," she said quietly, standing beside him as they looked out at the star-filled sky. "It's not my place to tell you what to do with the boy." Ethan sighed, leaning against the porch railing. "No, you were right. I've been to war, Miss Evans. I've seen what happens to children in institutions. But I don't know the first thing about raising a child. Few do until they have one," she replied with a small smile. "But children are resilient, and they need remarkably simple things: safety, stability, kindness. You've already provided those by bringing him here." "And what about you?" Ethan asked, turning to face her. "Why would a woman from Boston want to work on a remote cattle ranch in Montana Territory?" Dahlia was quiet for a moment, her eyes fixed on the distant mountains. "After my parents died, there was nothing left for me in Boston except memories and societal expectations I never much cared for. Out here." She gestured to the vast landscape. "Out here, a person can reinvent themselves, be judged by their actions rather than their background or circumstances." Her words resonated with Ethan, reminding him of his own reasons for coming west after the war. "It's not an easy life," he warned. "Few worthwhile things are," she replied simply. In that moment, looking at her profile illuminated by the moonlight, Ethan made a decision. "You can stay, Miss Evans. 1 month's trial. We'll see how it goes for all of us." Dahlia turned to him, a genuine smile lighting up her face. "Thank you, Mr. Vance. You won't regret it." The next morning, Ethan woke to the unfamiliar sounds of activity in his kitchen. For a disorienting moment, he couldn't place the soft humming or the clatter of cookware. Then he remembered Dahlia Evans was in his home, and there was a boy sleeping by his fireplace. He dressed quickly and emerged from his bedroom to find Samuel already awake, helping Dahlia prepare breakfast. The boy was carefully setting the table while Dahlia fried eggs and bacon on the stove. "Good morning, Mr. Vance," Dahlia greeted, her hair neatly braided and her face bright despite the early hour. "I hope you slept well." "Better than I have in a while," Ethan admitted, surprised to find it was true. The constant tension he carried in his shoulders seemed less pronounced this morning. Samuel looked up from his task, a cautious hope in his eyes. "Miss Dahlia says I might be able to stay here for a while. Is that true?" Ethan met Dahlia's gaze briefly before addressing the boy. "Yes, Samuel." "If you'd like to stay here, you're welcome to." The words came easier than he'd expected. The boy's face lit up. "Really? Can I help with the ranch? I'm strong and I learn quick." "I don't doubt it," Ethan replied with a small smile. "We'll start slow, though. Ranch work can be dangerous if you don't know what you're doing." After breakfast, Ethan took Samuel out to the barn to show him the horses and explain the basics of ranch life. The boy absorbed everything eagerly, asking intelligent questions and showing a natural affinity for the animals. "You've got a good way with horses," Ethan observed as Samuel cautiously offered an apple to his mare. "Pa had a plow horse," Samuel explained, gently stroking the mare's nose. "I used to help feed her and brush her down." The mention of his father dimmed the brightness in Samuel's eyes, and Ethan awkwardly placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Your pa would be proud to see you now," he said softly. "It takes courage to go on after losing people you love." Samuel nodded, blinking rapidly. "Do you think they're watching? Ma and Pa, I mean, from heaven?" Ethan, who had long ago lost whatever faith he might have had in the bloody fields of the war, found himself unable to deny the boy this comfort. "I reckon they are, son, and I reckon they're mighty relieved to see you safe." Over the next few weeks, a routine began to establish itself at the ranch. Dahlia took charge of the household, transforming the cabin into a proper home with efficient management and small, thoughtful touches. She planted an expanded vegetable garden, preserved food for the winter, and even began teaching Samuel his letters and numbers in the evenings. Ethan found himself increasingly impressed by her capabilities. She wasn't afraid of hard work, often joining him and Samuel in the barn or with the cattle when household chores were done. She learned quickly and never complained, even when the work left her with blisters on her hands or exhaustion in her eyes. One evening, about 3 weeks after Dahlia's arrival, Ethan returned from checking the far pasture to find her sitting on the porch, mending one of his shirts. Samuel was already asleep inside, worn out from a day of helping move a new calf and its mother to a different pasture. "Mind if I join you?" Ethan asked, settling himself on the step below her when she nodded. "The boy did well today," Dahlia remarked, her needle flashing in the fading light. "He has a natural instinct with the animals." "He does," Ethan agreed, removing his hat and running a hand through his hair. "He's a good kid." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the chirping of crickets and the distant lowing of cattle. "Your trial month is almost up," Ethan said eventually, staring out at the darkening landscape rather than at her. "I'd like you to stay on if you're willing." Dahlia's hands stilled. "I'd like that very much, Mr. Vance." "Ethan," he corrected, finally turning to look at her. "If you're staying, you might as well call me Ethan." A smile curved her lips. "Ethan," she repeated softly. "Then you must call me Dahlia." Something shifted between them in that moment, a subtle acknowledgement of the growing connection that neither had been ready to name. As summer faded into fall, the three of them settled into a rhythm that began to feel like family. Samuel thrived under their combined care, growing stronger and more confident each day. He started accompanying Ethan on longer rides around the property, learning the business of cattle ranching with enthusiasm. Dahlia proved herself indispensable, not just for her domestic skills, but for her practical intelligence and willingness to contribute to every aspect of ranch life. She learned to ride better, to help with branding, and even to shoot, though she admitted she had no taste for hunting. One crisp October day, Ethan took Samuel into town for supplies, leaving Dahlia at the ranch to prepare for the coming winter. In town, they encountered Mrs. Collins, their neighbor's wife, who eyed them with undisguised curiosity. "Mr. Vance," she greeted, her gaze lingering on Samuel. "And who is this young man?" "This is Samuel," Ethan replied, resting a protective hand on the boy's shoulder. "He's staying with me at the ranch." Mrs. Collins raised an eyebrow. "Is he now? And Miss Evans is still there as well, I understand." Her tone carried an implication that Ethan didn't miss, and he felt his jaw tighten. "She is. She's been a tremendous help." "I'm sure," Mrs. Collins said with a knowing smile. "Though you must be aware of how it looks, Mr. Vance. A single man, a single woman, and now a child, all living under one roof without the benefit of—" "Without the benefit of what, Mrs. Collins?" Ethan interrupted, his voice level but hard. "Well, of matrimony, of course," she replied, lowering her voice as if sharing a scandal. "People talk, Mr. Vance." Ethan felt Samuel shift uncomfortably beside him, and his protective instinct flared. "With all due respect, Mrs. Collins, what happens at my ranch is my business. Miss Evans is an employee and a friend, and Samuel is under my care. That's all anyone needs to know." Mrs. Collins pressed her lips together disapprovingly but nodded. "As you say, Mr. Vance." "Give my regards to Miss Evans." As they loaded their supplies into the wagon for the return journey, Samuel was unusually quiet. "Something on your mind, son?" Ethan asked as they set off. Samuel kicked his feet against the wagon seat. "What Mrs. Collins said." "Is Miss Dahlia in trouble because of me?" "Because we're all living together," Ethan sighed, cursing small-town gossip. "No, Samuel. Mrs. Collins and people like her just have old-fashioned ideas about how things should be. You don't need to worry about it." "But what if Miss Dahlia has to leave because people talk bad about her?" Samuel persisted, real fear in his voice. "I don't want her to go." Ethan realized then how attached Samuel had become to Dahlia, how attached they both had become to her. The thought of her leaving left an emptiness in his chest that he hadn't expected. "She won't have to leave," he assured Samuel, though uncertainty gnawed at him. He hadn't considered how their unconventional arrangement might affect Dahlia's reputation. When they returned to the ranch, Ethan found himself watching Dahlia more closely, noting the way she smiled at Samuel's excited recounting of their trip to town, the grace with which she moved around the kitchen, the strand of auburn hair that escaped her braid and curled against her cheek. That night after Samuel was asleep, Ethan joined Dahlia by the fire, where she was knitting what looked to be a scarf for the coming winter. "We ran into Mrs. Collins in town," he said quietly. Dahlia's hands paused briefly before resuming their rhythm. "I imagine she had plenty to say." "She did," Ethan confirmed, staring into the flames. "She made it clear that our living arrangement is causing talk." "I expected as much," Dahlia replied with a sigh. "Small communities thrive on such gossip." "It doesn't bother you?" Ethan asked, surprised by her calm acceptance. Dahlia set her knitting aside and met his gaze directly. "I left Boston to escape the constraints of societal expectations, Ethan. I'm not about to let them dictate my life here." Her voice softened. Unless it bothers you." "If my presence is causing problems, no," Ethan interrupted quickly, more forcefully than he'd intended. "That's not what I'm saying at all. I don't want to see your reputation damaged because of our arrangement." A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. "My reputation is my own concern, but thank you for your consideration." They fell silent, the crackling of the fire filling the space between them. Ethan found himself studying her profile, the way the firelight cast golden highlights in her hair and softened the determined line of her jaw. "Samuel was worried you might leave," he said finally, his voice rougher than usual. "He's become very attached to you." Dahlia turned to him, her eyes reflecting the dancing flames. "And I to him," she admitted softly, then, after a pause, to both of you. The admission hung in the air between them, laden with unspoken meaning. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest, a mixture of fear and longing he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. "Dahlia, he began, but was interrupted by a crash of thunder so loud it rattled the windows. Samuel stirred on his pallet, whimpering in his sleep. Dahlia immediately went to the boy, kneeling beside him and smoothing his hair as he settled back into sleep. Ethan watched her, the tenderness in her touch, and knew with sudden clarity what he had perhaps wanted since the day she appeared on his porch. The storm raged throughout the night, bringing much-needed rain but also fierce wind that damaged part of the barn roof. The next morning, Ethan and Dahlia worked side by side to repair it, Samuel handing them tools and nails with eager helpfulness. As they worked, Ethan found himself increasingly aware of Dahlia's proximity, the brush of her arm against his as she passed him a hammer, the scent of lavender that clung to her hair, the sound of her laughter when Samuel made a joke. By mid-afternoon, the roof was patched well enough to withstand another storm, and they descended from the ladder, tired but satisfied with their work. "You're good with your hands," Ethan remarked as Dahlia coiled excess rope neatly. "My father was a carpenter," she explained. "He believed daughters should be as capable as sons." "A wise man," Ethan said with genuine admiration. Dahlia smiled, the warmth of it reaching her eyes. "He would have liked you, I think. He valued honesty and hard work above all else." Later that evening, after Samuel had been tucked into bed with stories of Ethan's cattle drives, Dahlia stepped outside to enjoy the cool night air. The storm had cleared, leaving behind a sky brilliant with stars and a land refreshed by rain. She heard the door open behind her and knew without turning that it was Ethan. His footsteps were familiar to her now, as was the particular way he cleared his throat when he had something important to say. "Beautiful night," she commented, giving him time to find his words. "Dahlia," he began, moving to stand beside her. "What I was trying to say last night before the storm, I've been thinking about what Mrs. Collins said." Dahlia felt her heart quicken. "Oh, not about the gossip," he clarified quickly, "but about matrimony." She turned to face him fully, hardly daring to breathe. "Ethan Vance, are you proposing to me?" He looked momentarily flustered, rubbing the back of his neck. "I'm making a mess of it, aren't I? I should have planned this better." A laugh bubbled up from Dahlia's chest, born of joy and nervousness in equal measure. "Perhaps you should try again," she suggested gently. Ethan took a deep breath, then reached for her hands, holding them in his larger, calloused ones. "Dahlia Evans, I never expected to find someone like you, especially not when I pulled my wagon over for a crying boy on the road. But these past months with you and Samuel have been the happiest I can remember. I know it hasn't been long, and I know I'm not much of a catch, a scarred war veteran with a small ranch and now an orphaned boy to raise, but I love you. I love your strength, your kindness, your intelligence. I love the way you've made this place a home. And if you'll have me, I'd be honored to call you my wife." Tears welled in Dahlia's eyes, but her smile was radiant. "Ethan Vance, that was a perfectly wonderful proposal. Is that a yes?" he asked, hope brightening his blue eyes. "Yes," she whispered, stepping closer to him. "Yes, I will marry you." Ethan's arms encircled her waist, drawing her against him as his lips found hers in a tender kiss that quickly deepened with the release of months of unspoken longing. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. "What about Samuel?" Dahlia asked, her forehead resting against Ethan's. "I was thinking we might adopt him officially," Ethan replied. "Make him ours if he wants that." Dahlia's heart swelled with love for this man who had opened his home and heart to both her and an orphan child. "He'll want that more than anything," she assured him. The next morning, they sat Samuel down at the breakfast table and shared their news. The boy's face went from confusion to shock to overwhelming joy in the span of seconds. "You're getting married," he exclaimed, looking between them. And you want me to stay, forever?" "More than that," Ethan said, his voice gruff with emotion. "We want you to be our son, Samuel, officially, if you'd like that." Samuel launched himself from his chair, wrapping his arms around both of them. "Yes, yes, I want that," he cried, tears of happiness streaming down his face. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in town, with Samuel standing proudly at Ethan's side as his best man. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, attended by a few neighbors and townspeople who had come to respect the unusual family that had formed at the Vance Ranch. As winter settled over Montana, the three of them faced the harsh season as a family, Ethan and Dahlia now sharing the master bedroom, while Samuel had a proper bed in what had once been the storage room, transformed by Dahlia's skilled hands into a cozy bedroom. On Christmas Eve, as snow fell gently outside, they sat together by the fire, Samuel between them on the small sofa Ethan had built as a wedding present for Dahlia. "This is the best Christmas ever," Samuel declared, leaning his head against Dahlia's shoulder. "The first of many," Dahlia promised, meeting Ethan's gaze over the boy's head. Ethan reached across, taking her hand in his, their fingers intertwining with comfortable familiarity. "Who would have thought," he mused softly, "that finding a crying boy on the road would lead to all this?" Dahlia squeezed his hand, her heart full. Sometimes the greatest blessings come from the most unexpected beginnings. As the snow continued to fall outside, blanketing the ranch in pristine white, the Vance family, forged not by blood but by love, choice, and circumstance, celebrated their first Christmas together, secure in the knowledge that no matter what challenges the frontier might bring, they would face them together. Spring came to Montana with its usual unpredictability, days of warm sunshine interspersed with sudden snowstorms and biting winds. By April, however, the land had firmly committed to renewal, with wildflowers dotting the prairie and newborn calves wobbling alongside their mothers in the pastures. On a particularly fine morning, Ethan stood on the porch, watching as Dahlia and Samuel worked in the expanded garden they had planned together during the long winter evenings. Samuel, now 9 years old and growing like a weed, was digging furrows for vegetable seeds while Dahlia marked the rows with string, the sight of them his wife and son. A family he had never imagined having filled Ethan with a contentment so deep, it sometimes scared him. He had learned during the war how quickly happiness could be snatched away, but each day with Dahlia and Samuel helped ease those old fears. "Pa," Samuel called, noticing him watching. "Come see what we're planting." Ethan smiled at the ease with which the boy had adopted the title, as if he had always been his son. He walked down to join them, listening as Samuel excitedly explained their plans for corn, beans, potatoes, and Dahlia's special request a small patch of flowers just because they're pretty. As he helped them with the planting, Ethan reflected on how much had changed in less than a year. His solitary existence had been transformed, his quiet ranch now filled with laughter, conversation, and the occasional disagreement that was always resolved before bedtime. Dahlia insisted on that rule. That evening, after Samuel had gone to bed, Ethan and Dahlia sat on the porch swing he had built for her birthday, watching as the last light faded from the sky. Dahlia leaned against his shoulder, her hand resting lightly on her abdomen in a gesture that had become familiar over the past few weeks. "I think we should tell Samuel soon," she said softly, "before he starts to notice on his own." Ethan covered her hand with his, feeling the barely perceptible swell beneath her dress. "Tomorrow," he agreed, "he'll be thrilled to be a big brother." Dahlia turned her face up to his, her eyes reflecting the first emerging stars. "Are you happy, Ethan? Truly," he leaned down to kiss her gently. "Happier than I ever thought possible," he assured her, and eternally grateful for a crying boy and the cowboy who stopped to help him. As night fell fully over the Montana prairie, Ethan held his wife close, marveling at the journey that had brought them together, a journey that had begun with an act of simple kindness on a dusty road, and had led to the greatest love and joy he had ever known.